László, a film like this isn't undertaken lightly. And I know that part of what drew you to make this film had to do with family history. But what I'm interested to ask you is what drew you specifically to the story of the Sonderkommando, which is not a subject that's been dealt with very much in movies, if at all, and certainly not to this degree.
Yeah, the story of the Sonderkommando is very is not widely known. Although these people are at the center of the extermination process, and their manuscripts still exist, and the texts that were found are incredibly powerful. Also because, mainly because they transport the reader into the very core, the here and now of the crematorium, the extermination process. So you can, by reading the text, the reader can experience without the post-war interpretation or standpoint or any kind of transformation, the very existence of within the concentration camp. And I think in cinema they were not represented apart from very few cases, and probably for the reason that it's hard to go into the crematorium. How do you go into the crematorium? You what kind of angle do you have to represent the something that's really hard to communicate or represent or describe without being too horror-like or too direct. And if you take it to an abstract to an extra level, then you make it too abstract, and you take away the really the strength. So I think when I found the text 10 years ago, I wanted to make a film about them because they're about their experience. They about the core experience of the Holocaust. That's death, and not the exception being survival. So I wanted to make a film on them within the context of the crematorium, let's say one day in the crematorium, but I didn't know how to do it. So I needed time to find the angle, and I started experimenting with the approach in my short films, and it took years and years. But when we wrote the screenplay, we knew already that we needed this very special angle to go into this situation.
In the texts that survive from the Sonderkommando, what kind of feelings do they express about what they did? Because one of the things that's very striking in the film is nobody's happy, but there's not much emphasis on a sense of guilt or a sense of being conflicted, although no doubt those feelings were there. They're not apparent on the surface. So I'm curious as to what the original texts, to what degree these writers struggled with their guilt.
And they wrote their texts in secrecy and burying them into the ground around the crematoria, where they were found. These texts, at least, because we know there are other texts, but they'll never be found. I think that what obsessed them was the idea of the extermination of their people taking place will, for them, erase all the Jews from the earth, more or less. but will there be someone, a trace? Will there be someone to communicate what took place? So actually, they are in the realm of the dead, I think, and not of the living. And there's something also that I guess guided us to a certain extent when dealing with these people and how to represent them, and how to embody the members of the Sonderkommando while not trying to project post-war emotions or emotions codified in films onto their behavior.
Now, your lead actor, Géza, born in Hungary but now lives in Riverdale. It's a long reach to bring this actor back to Hungary to make this film, and what led you to him? And did you have any hesitation about undertaking this? I mean, Géza, did you have any hesitation?
Should I? Of course. I think it was a risky project. Nobody wanted to really to support it apart from the Hungarians. We tried to make it as a co-production. It seemed very very too risky and too ambitious, and to nowadays European cinema, when you, especially for a first-time filmmaker, being ambitious is like being a lunatic. Yeah, so almost you're sure not being funded or not having fund for your film. So the adding to the to this visual strategy that was described in our note, and to the fact that it's a first-time project that takes place in the concentration camp, in the crematorium. So adding to this the fact that we wanted to have a man who is who lives in New York and who hasn't been on screen for 20 years. That's something that doesn't reassure anybody, including me, myself. I just.
But how did you come to Géza? How did he?
Well, we try to think of professional actors. Yeah, I know he hates not being included in that, but he's right. And professional poets, as you like referring to them. No, we were thinking of actors from Europe, and we. It seemed when we did some auditions and people switching on something during the audition, that they switched off after the audition, and I think not in a conscious way, but I wanted someone who wouldn't switch off the soul, the main character that can be found within. So and Géza has this stubborn quality. The layers in his personality are really intriguing, and I think in a way I didn't write the screenplay while thinking about Géza, but at the same time it kind of made sense. We're not in a sort of revelation of a second. It just started to grow on me, and when I started to consider an old friend from New York that I met years before, and I hadn't heard from him in years. So I sent him an email. So why don't you send me just a short video of you when you tell a story? And that's how it started.
So you had known him before he from when you were in New York.
Yeah.
And switching to Géza, was it difficult for you to make a decision about whether to become involved in this project?
No, it wasn't. Well, I am 10 years older than László, and I was 46 at the time when I first read the script, and it spoke to me right away. I spent decades of my life by then, wrestling with this subject matter. In many ways, I feel like my entire life was in some way a preparation, and lots of aspects of my life came to fruition, and I was able to bring into this role. I guess I mean by that I'm a father. I have an idea what a father is in at least two ways, because I had one and I lost one, and I myself have 4 beautiful kids. And then I had a grandfather who was liberated from the Budapest ghetto, but his 11 years old younger brother wasn't that lucky, and his pregnant sister wasn't that lucky, and his parents were not that lucky. And after my father, he was and is my most important person in my life. We played a lot of chess. He was retired. He had a lot of time for me. And he was the one who initiated me, so to speak, into what happened, what took place. And then I was a university student in Poland, and I visited the camp in 1986. I was 19 years old. The camp was still under Soviet care. It wasn't in the Polish hands. And it wasn't a tourist attraction back then. It was a very different place as it is now. It was a winter day, and a visit, what meant to be a one-day visit, turned out to be a month. And I rented a room in Oświęcim, which is the Polish name of the city Auschwitz. And every day I went there from opening till like 5 o'clock to closing. And I right away felt, which just became more and more clear to me over the years, that what happened here somehow is not a part of the flow of normal history. Somehow, I started back then, asking my questions: how, in the heart of Europe, this could have not taken place if the without the request and the received help from every sector of the German society. I mean, Sachsenhausen is right next to Berlin. Buchenwald is right next to Weimar. Dachau is right next to Munich. These cities are centers of German civilization. How did Auschwitz come to being? And what if the leaders, the heads of the church would have said in 1935, we are not Aryans, we are Jews by spirit? It would have right away collapsed, I think. And my question was larger than just Auschwitz. It didn't start then. It was there is a whole history leading up to 1944. And I'm still struggling, of these questions. And I just heard today that, Mahatma Gandhi died in 1948. And he had some friends, some Jewish friends, and he was intimately aware of what happened during the Holocaust. And in an interview, they asked him, what do you think of Western civilization? You heard that, right? Yeah. And he said, I think it's a good idea.
It would be a good idea.
Right, it would be a good idea. In other words, to me, Auschwitz calls everything into question. And when people are, sometimes they're asking, like, it's 70 years, can you just not turn the page, guys? I mean, move on. There's no way to move on, because, 1 every 3 Jews were murdered, but so was 1 every 3 Cambodians were murdered, a few decades later. And I'm telling you that if you have a precedent, precedents have a tendency to become patterns. And then you mentioned Darfur, of course, Rwanda, and so on. It all would not have happened if Auschwitz if the Holocaust is not taking place right in the heart of Europe. It's something that I can't walk away from.
There's a kind of a never resolved ambiguity surrounding your character. He insists that this boy is his son. he visits the woman in the area of the camp where the women work, and he seems to know this woman, but he sort of denies her, and yet she knows his name, and the implication is that she is his wife. It's never made explicit, but there's a lot to suggest it. And he insists that the boy is a child that he had with outside of that marriage. I don't quite believe any of it, but it seems to drive the character.
I never thought about. I mean, I did, but it's interesting how people take signals from the film and try to unite them. It's fair. I never intended the girl to be his wife or the mother of his child or anything like that. But please.
There is a line that you're referring to that's saying he's not from my wife. And that, of course, opens up to the interpretation that he is driven by guilt because he wasn't there for him in his life. So right now he wants to do, at least what he can right now in his death. But I think if you understand your question, what you're asking is that how did I flesh it up or colored his character when we know so little about him?
Yeah.
We don't know if he was rich or poor before the war. There's very little given, right? That's true, and I think that's intentional. We basically know that he could have not come from a very religious household because he doesn't know Kaddish, and he doesn't even know that you don't need a rabbi for a funeral. In Judaism, you only need a rabbi for a wedding, for God's sake. The only event you really need a rabbi is a divorce. But somehow, in the foremost sense, he wasn't educated or religious, but he still felt strong somehow to attach that the proper way to bury this boy somehow has to be done.
It seems to have a symbolic function for him more than a kind of. I mean, it's an absurd goal to set yourself, and all of the odds are stacked against him being able to achieve his goal.
Right.
And so it has to have the power of some kind of a symbol.
Right.
And I wonder if you could talk about that.
Well,
yeah, but what's the absurdity in the context of a concentration camp?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting thing. People come up to me after the movie and in lack of a better word, the secular people, they think that Saul is a madman. What is he doing? He should really join the revolt. Like, this is really just so antisocial. Well, what is he doing? It's nerve-wracking. Like, what's the point? There are 1.5 million children under 15. They all got burned, so what difference does it make if you bury one, right? So from the very practical point of view. And then you have, again, in lack of a better word, people who are a bit more spiritual or open to other dimensions, and they get it, and they realize that resistance is taking place in this movie on two different levels. One is what the rest of the squad is planning, is just to get the hell out of here, which is legitimate and almost biological. They want to save their skin. And Saul, to me, is a level higher than that. He's doing something for someone else. He's not concerned primarily with the survival of his body. He is really not even worried about survival, to be honest, at least the way I understood it. I think what happened is that death was so omnipresent in Auschwitz that it basically vanished from sight. Death was everywhere, and every death was the same. So for even just to notice one death, the only way to do that is because the boys survived the gas chambers. So that was a miraculous sign that somehow caught his attention. No one does that, which is, by the way, historically true and recorded, that some people, very few, of course, did survive the gas chamber, and they all got killed by the Nazi doctors. So there is a connection made with this boy. Either his real son, or he adopts him doesn't really matter. But that experience, this agonizing boy, somehow brings him back to normalcy. And there is very few basic things that I would guess all world religions agree to. But feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and helping the poor and burying the dead, this is just really the most, elementarily human duties, obligations we have. Animals do not bury each other. So somehow, basically, he disregards the context, the situation that he finds himself in, and he does basically proves with his behavior that there are laws that are eternal, no matter what. They are, so to speak, from out of space and time. They are just valid, and burying the dead is one of them. And that's why I argue that I think he is the happiest man in the movie, and he has a purpose. And basically, even though he could not, bury him with the Kaddish, but at least he saved him from the fire. And he has a sense of fulfillment, and that's what I think that smile might be at the end of the movie, that he did what he could, and the execution is always in God's hand, but the effort, he did what he could.
Let's get some questions from the audience. Yes. Yeah, the question was, were there other films, previous films about the Holocaust that influenced you? And in this undertaking, did the actual physical process of making this film have a very strong impact on the cast and crew?
The only film, no, there are two films that influenced me that are on the subject, but one is very directly linked to the subject, the other is more indirect. Claude Lanzmann's shows, I think, had a very great impact on us, but it's a documentary, although Lanzmann would say it's not a documentary, but it kind of looks like a documentary. The fact that there's such a big offstage, out of frame realm in the film, that there's a sort of invisible mental perspective towards the death, the dead that are still there in a way, haunting us, and only having those shadows, those human shadows still alive. It's something that influenced us in an indirect manner, but also more directly with the uncompromising attitude, the fact that it even in the colors and the framing, there was something, I think, communicated to us, and more indirectly the Russian film by Alan Klimov, Come and See. I say more indirectly because it's more indirectly dealing with the Holocaust, but it's dealing with massacres on the Eastern Front in 1941 in Belarus. But this is a very organic film, presenting from the point of view of a young boy the massacres and that hell that takes place on Earth. Of course, our attitude in showing was to show much less than the much more open, the Baroque representation, the Bosch-like representation of hell. I would mention this. For the rest, I think it's a lot of films were made, and these films deal with the exception, the survival, or create a very safe path for the viewer based on codified iconography and dramaturgical elements that actually introduce a great deal of distance between the viewer and and what has become a subject or a context. And in a fairly static way, these films were not trying to give anything of the experience of the camp, but rather show frontally and be in a sense telling all they could and show all they could to the audiences. But our premise was that the experience within the camp is based on limitation and lack of information and the fact that we do not know what's going to happen next. So how do you represent something that's infinite in its destruction and in its oppression of the human being? And our angle was to make the portrait of a man and take this man as a measure, as a reference point, and only allow the flow of information in a very fragmented manner, because we think that when we rely on the imagination of the viewer, we can hint at the infinity of the evil that's taking place much more effectively, and the immersive strategy that we had creates a visceral, intuitive understanding of the limitations of the camp within the camp, within the existence of one human being. So I think we also did this film so that it would be a little bit harder after that to make a film in the camp.
Did making the film weigh heavily on everybody, on your crew, on your cast?
Yeah, I think we had the sense that we were in the middle of a place that didn't seem like to be a movie set. A lot of lighting was integrated to the set, especially for inside the crematorium. We had places, and the places were interconnected. The crematorium levels were interconnected, the inside, outside. So the cast and crew had the feeling that they were in a very believable place, and I didn't want to cut from when we were exiting the crematorium or entering. We wanted to give this immersive experience, this very organic feeling to the movie. And this relied on the strategy of having an interconnected space and a changing space, but at the same time, I think it helped the actors quite a lot, and background actors as well, and the crew as well. We had this feeling that there was sort of oppressive atmosphere. I'm not saying we were crying all the time, but it was certainly we could feel the presence of a real situation. It seemed real to a certain extent.
Yes. Well, the question was, what was your ultimate purpose in taking on this specific aspect of the Holocaust?
I think the one that I was referring to before, that give the audience some kind of intimate understanding and relationship with the people caught within that. That just erase the sort of distance that we put in the post-war era. Maybe in a way to reassure ourselves or reassure societies, but to erase this distance, but a distance that ultimately comes to a sort of result in which we ask, one can ask, and people are asking that, why were these people going to the gas chamber, or why didn't they do this or that? What I'm saying is that the brain is conditioned, I think, in such an exceptional moment as within the camp, to not to think, and not to not having this kind of control or distance. Where we're in a different state of mind, and all the films that were, introducing this distance and relying on this distance also used a point of view strategy that corresponded to I don't know what kind of point of view, So you have this sometimes this epic panoramic description of the camp, for example, or the Holocaust in space and time, pretty in a large way, and the point of view, for example, that comes back is a sort of external point of views, establishing point of views, high angle point of views. What is that? What kind of point of view is that? So a human being would have never experienced that. Maybe a bird or a guard or something like that. But I think I wanted to communicate something of the human experience and the limitations of it.
More questions? Yes. There's a question about the funding of the film and whether the Hungarian government was involved in the funding of the film, given the level of anti-Semitism in Hungary today.
No, not directly. There's a Hungarian Film Fund, which is a state, an organization created by a state, and that's supervised by a committee of a board. Deciding on projects, and they've been, deciding on projects on professional basis and not on political basis, which is interesting that in Hungary, where you have a high level of anti-Semitic feeling and intolerance, this film can be made, whereas, for example, in other countries of Europe, with very seemingly very diverse cinemas, this film was refused and rejected, and very much so. But I would argue also that anti-Semitism is very strong in Europe, and not a monopoly of Hungary. And unfortunately, and not even only Europe, I think it's pretty well spread. And so did we? That's what I want to say.
We have time for a couple more. Yes. Yeah. To repeat the question, during the film, we're always with the character. We always have the same amount of information as the character. We're restricted to that. But when it comes to the question of the rabbi, the man that identifies himself as a rabbi and that he brings back, we get a little ahead of the character in the sense that we because of a comment another character makes and just our own intuition, we are a little bit ahead of the main character in doubting that this guy is a rabbi. And why did you choose to kind of have that be the crux of, or the moment where we have more information than...
Well, it seems that, in fact, the character has more information than we do. It's just that we don't, we're not going all the way to his, to his version. I mean, we don't know all the details. Also because these people have have only present, have no past or future. So some elements of backstory that were more present in previous versions of the script actually got ejected in the process from the material in a natural way. It just seemed weird to have the backstory elements that were there, and but at some point, there's might be a sort of dramatic irony at some point, sneaking in, this guy is doing something that, in this stubborn way, whereas, he might be completely wrong. But at that time, hopefully the viewer has established a sort of relationship to the main character, to the quest that doesn't make sense to the others around him, only to himself, but maybe it makes sense to the viewer. This sort of very some kind of secret of the main character. That's about when there's no more hope and no more religion. There might be still a voice inside, that would mean something, and that would allow us to remain human. And I think that at this point it's not important anymore, this information, whether it's his son or not his son. It might at that time be on another level, and that's what we were trying to achieve.
Yes, in the back.
Well, I'm glad that Sony Classics has been supportive, and I told them, when they picked up the film, that I really wanted this film, if distributed in America, to be as much as possible in 35mm. This is the intended format. I think you can see, it looks different from digital projection, and when I see the digital version of this film, I run immediately out of the room, and I say, I don't want to have to do anything with this. It's such a turn off. Yeah, it's difficult, but there's a sort of self-realizing prophecy in the industry saying everybody's abandoning it, so everybody's abandoning it. But at the same time, when someone starts talking about it and say, okay, maybe we shouldn't kill projection and cinema just to please a few projector makers and I don't know who else. Sometimes it starts another wave, another kind of trend, at least, just to resist, not to be completely overtaken by, video. It's good to have, at least would be nice to preserve film as a sort of something that can remain, as opposed to digital that's good for television or whatever. But we really wanted to make this in a photochemical way, and because it's not expensive in itself, it's just that in the introduction of DI made it more expensive to go into the computer and to get out of get a film out of the computer. Then it became more expensive. But I think that especially for this film, the levels of in the image, the perspective, even it's out of focus. In film, it's a living picture. The grain structure is much, can create much stronger color and image contrast, and I just makes the image have more depth, whereas digital just flattens the image in all ways. I could go on forever with this, so I'm going to stop.
Okay, one last question, if there is one. Is there one? One last one? Yeah. What was the response in Hungary to the film?
Very, very strong. I think very good. It did very well, and people talk about it, and so that's the most the best thing about this. I think that people talk about the film and think about it, and it just doesn't go away. It seems immediately after you leave the screening room. I hope it will not for you. So it keeps to be, it remains in the conversations. And that it can travel to other continents, to other cultures is even more, satisfying. Hungary has been it was important to be there, and, very early. And now the second release will be in France in November. But I think Hungarians were a little bit surprised that a film, especially for first timer, can get this kind of attention in the world's main festivals and travel. Everybody was a little caught by surprise, but me too, let me tell you. So it's been a great adventure.
Okay, László, Géza, thank you very much.
Thank you.